What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Siren Sounds. Doing another one of these after a win. It's kind of nice. Recording this Thursday night. Wednesday night, Sarah Fillier kept the Sirens' playoff hopes alive. And she did it with a natural hat trick, basically single-handedly willing the Sirens to a win. And listen, let's dive right in. Let's key in on kept the Sirens' playoff hopes alive, because I think that's probably the best way to put it. Now, we can get into technicalities. If the Sirens lose Wednesday to Minnesota, are they eliminated from playoff contention? No. So, but I look at the landscape a little bit, right? And the Sirens have lost 9 to 10 games coming in. You look at how Ottawa and Toronto are playing. I think read the tea leaves, and if they don't get any points in that game, I think that's probably the dagger that kills any hopes of one last playoff rally. And there was a little bit there where that kind of started to sink in and become a reality. I mean, you're talking about there's 8 minutes, 40 seconds left in the third period. The Sirens are trailing 3-1. And they let up that devastating goal right at the beginning of the third period to Zumwinkle. You're kind of going through in your head, oh, it's all happening all over again. This is another this tough loss to get over. And Sarah Fillier hops out of the penalty box. She intercepts a pass, comes down the breakaway, scores on the backhand, scores again 14 seconds later. And just like that, the feel of the game and potentially the feel of the season the rest of the way is completely changed. There's a lot to get into with the game. It's one of the wilder games to be at for a couple different reasons. But Fillier is the headliner. I think that's the easiest place to start. And then we branch off from there. All right, this has been an interesting season for Sarah Fillier. One of the first thing that comes to mind is she had that 14-game goal drought from December 3rd to March 5th, I believe. It was the span of the games, of the 14 games. And that was something we talked about on the first episode of Siren Sounds. The first episode was she had just scored, I think she scored twice to snap that goal drought. But right, it's been an interesting season where I think she's been productive all year long, but she had that lengthy stretch where she wasn't producing, and certainly not scoring at the rate that you're used to seeing someone like Sarah Fillier score. That has not been an issue, certainly down the stretch here. In this 6-game stretch, it's 7 goals, 8 points for Fillier. And I think you probably should have seen this coming. We're talking about one of the greatest forwards on the planet right now. And if you'd watched any of her games, even when she was going through that goal drought, right, you saw someone that was making a lot of good plays, making a lot of smart plays, being super active in the offensive zone. You saw someone that didn't look like a quote-unquote slumping forward. And for whatever reason, and poor puck luck, going up against good goalies, for whatever reason, the shots weren't going in. And I think it's certainly a little jarring, right? Someone that scored 13 goals last season that tied the league lead in points with 29. Coming in off that rookie campaign, you kind of have her penned, especially with Alex Carpenter leaving, as, all right, this is the key to our offense. This is the main person that's going to lead us. And while it's still very productive, right, the goals weren't there. It was Kaltounkova very early on. Taylor Girard had a couple of big surges. Now you're seeing Sarah Fillier put pucks into the net at will. And I want you to keep in mind the 14-game goal drought, because that's basically half the season. PWHL is a 30-game regular season. Keep that in mind when I read to you her rankings in the league. She's tied for 4th in points. She's got 19. There's a Minnesota trio at the top with 24. So she's in that next tier with a couple other players at 19. She's tied for 12th with 8 goals. Someone that didn't score a goal for 14 consecutive games. And she's top 5 in league scoring. She keeps up this pace. She's probably going to be top 10 in goal scoring by the end of the season. I think probably finds her way onto one of the end-of-the-year all-star teams that the first team, second team kind of thing. I think at least certainly has a very convincing case to be on one of those. I think that's kind of remarkable because, again, it's been I don't know if you want to say up and down season. Again, I would say that she's been playing at a high level all season long. But obviously the goal scoring and the scoring touch wasn't there for a decent chunk of the first half. That you factor that in, that this player basically went half the season without scoring a goal concurrently and still is going to finish as one of the league's top producers, right? There's no question that you're watching one of the greatest forwards in the league. And what do you need your stars to do? You need them to step up in big moments. You need them to elevate to the moment. And if your season needs saving, you need them to be the one that's going to do it. And Fillier is up to the task. And that's a game, it's your third straight game without Kaltounkova. Kaltounkova goes on LTIR. Obviously, we got to get into that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But you're talking about an offense that, at least coming in, was without its two top goal scorers in Kaltounkova and Girard. It's an offense that I think it scored 4 goals in its last 3 games without Girard. And so you're starting to look at, like, all right, who do we lean on? Sure, Casey O'Brien, sure, Matty Wheeler, who scored a goal in that game, but who's the most proven player in that offense, and who's the most proven player on this team? It's Sarah Fillier. And when the Sirens needed Sarah Fillier, she was there. Because, I mean, the fact of the matter is they were dead in the water in that game. They were careening towards another loss. The Zumwinkle scores that goal and the life gets sucked out of the building. And you watch a Sirens team that for the next 10 minutes or so there just kind of flounders. And they take 3 penalties, and they're not good penalties. It's a team that, it's kind of that thing you see when a team is trying to get back into a game and trying to find a spark and going about it the wrong way. The way to spark yourself is to create some offense, and that's what Sarah Fillier did. And Greg Fargo used the phrase, she put us on her back. And that is what it felt. I said earlier, she single-handedly wills them to that win. I think both are accurate descriptors of what she did in that game. Because, again, she hops out of the penalty box, just says, that puck's mine, weaves her way through. I mean, it's a really smooth backhand goal. Obviously, Fillier has great hands. They're on display there. And then instantly, right, okay, the building comes to life and everyone kind of wakes up and goes, hey, this is a 1-goal game. They win the face-off at center ice, go right into the offensive zone, and it's a shot from Nyland Pearson at the point. Ricochets off Vanessa Upson, and Fillier's right there, fires it past Maddie Rooney. You've got a tie game, and you saw that energy just kind of seep its way into the rest of the lineup. And if you go back and you watch the last 8 minutes or so of that regulation, and I think it carries on into overtime, but obviously overtime's a different animal with it being 3-on-3. But if you go back and you watch the last 8 minutes of that game, a much different feel than the first 12 of the third period. Night and day difference. And it's interesting how quickly this Sirens team can get sparked. I think about a game earlier in the season when the Sirens almost erased a 3-goal deficit against Minnesota, and they end up losing 4-3 at Grand Casino Arena. That was one of those games where they're down big and they feel lifeless. It feels dead and feels like the outcome of the game is a fait accompli. And then all of a sudden, I think that was a big Anna Bargman game, right? All of a sudden, you get a couple goals, and this team sparks to life, and they play really good down the stretch, and they give a really good run at the end. The difference here was that they were actually able to complete the comeback, and Fillier completes it in overtime. It's a pretty cool overtime goal, too, if you go back and you look at it. I think she shoots it through Lee Steckline's legs, and it just kind of flutters over Maddie Rooney's glove. It's a pretty sick play. The building's electric. I have the press box. It's a modified press box. Not really a press box, it's more of a restaurant, but that's where they put the media. Is behind one of the nets. It's behind the net that Fillier scored on the overtime winner. So I got a good look of Fillier scores that goal and just makes a beeline for the wall. And obviously there's a lot of fans there at the wall going crazy. And she kind of engages with them for a second and just kind of screams in their faces. It's one of those really authentic and emotional moments that you get in sports sometimes from a team that needed one. That really needed a big moment in a really in a really bad way, right? 9 losses in 10 games. Feels like nothing's gone right for them in this stretch. And then Fillier has this great moment with this hat trick. And all of a sudden, you start to feel like, there's a little bit of hope again here. In terms of the game itself, because I do think that's it for Fillier. Well, one last thing here. Or maybe 2 more last things here. That line that they've recently constructed, and it is interesting because Greg Fargo mentioned this postgame, that they've had trouble finding a bunch of lines that work at the same time. And I think observationally you can notice they'll find certain pairings that work, or certain 3-player lineups in the forward group that work at one time or another. But throughout the season, have they really had 3 or 4 lines that are all gelling at the same time? Not really. And Greg Fargo kind of said, almost unprompted postgame, I feel really good about where the lines are. And he mentioned, it's been a problem for us to try and find that cohesion up and down the lineup. I think the lines are in a pretty good spot right now, but the one that's been at its best is this Fillier, O'Brien, Czerkowski line. They've been noticeably dangerous, and it kind of becomes less of a takeaway in the Montreal game because they end up losing that game, and they only score 1 goal. The Fillier, Czerkowski, O'Brien line looks so dangerous, especially in the first period of that game. You start to think, we might have something here. And they're dangerous again today. And so that's a line. Again, Kaltounkova is going to be out for a while. I don't think there's any need to mess with these lines a ton. I'd keep that first grouping together because it seems like they got a lot of cohesion right now, a lot of chemistry, a lot of good things going for them. The other thing with Fillier is obviously this is her first year wearing the A in her jersey. She got named alternate captain. I think you're seeing her really step into more of a leadership role. And I wrote this down because she had a good interview with Abby Labar on the ice postgame, probably like 2 minutes after she scored that overtime winner.
Yeah, we're young. We know that. We don't shy away from it. We don't have a ton of experience, but we're hungry. We want to make playoffs so bad.
That's what you want to hear from someone that's in a leadership role and a captain role. Right, this is a young team, and this is an inexperienced team, especially when it comes to postseason experience. And we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the trade to acquire Denisa Křížovà, because that's something that maybe moves the needle more in that direction. But clearly the stretch hasn't gone this way, and frankly, could zoom out and say the 3 years for the New York Sirens so far have not gone the way that you'd hope or the way that you might have envisioned. And there are, I would say, flaws with this roster construction. When I say flaws or just hurdles, but one of those hurdles is this is a really young team. And in professional sports, especially hockey, young players and their production can be volatile. And they've got to get used to playing at the professional level and making a jump from college to pros. And that's an honest answer, but it's also, I like that she mentioned that they're hungry, because I don't think their hunger has ever been in doubt. But I think it's nice to hear an answer like that. And it seems like Fillier's got a really good pulse in the locker room right now. In terms of the game itself, Maddie Wheeler has a really interesting quote post-game when they're talking about having a better response after mistakes and the attitude throughout this losing skid. And one of the talking points from Greg Fargo after the Montreal loss was, hey, we need to have, I'm paraphrasing here, but we need to have more resolve when mistakes happen. The puck's going to go, people are going to score against us. The puck's going to go into our net. And we can't afford to just fold. I'm getting very generous here with how I'm paraphrasing it. That's not exactly how he put it. But essentially the point is, we need to be more resilient. We need to be able to overcome mistakes and fight back. And Maddie Wheeler says a couple of things. And one of the things she says is, it felt like we finally got closer to playing a complete 60 minutes. She said finally played a complete 60. I wouldn't say they played a complete 60. I kind of disagree on that point. Listen, they were definitely resilient on Wednesday. And there are a couple moments that Fargo pointed to, and I think it's easy to point to as, hey, credit to them. those are moments that could have killed them right away, and they find a way to get back and stay competitive. The first is 16 seconds after puck drop. Minnesota catches New York up ice and scores off the rush. Taylor Heinze just kind of weaving through and slips one under the glove of Callie Shanahan. And for a team, again, that's been slumping, let up a goal in the first 16 seconds. That's about as demoralizing as it can get. That's about as bad of a start as it can get, especially for a team that bad starts have been a problem, especially on this stretch. And for them to punch back and Maddie Wheeler scores that goal and to tie the game, really look at that first period, even though shots are even, New York ends up being, on the whole, the better team in that period and had a lot of time in the offensive zone. But then again, you go through the second period and Minnesota scores in the power play and New York doesn't score in the power play. And then right away at the start of the third period, Minnesota scores again, and all of a sudden it's a 3-1 game. And this time, we saw New York kind of deflate, right? The energy leaves the building. I felt like the energy left the Sirens too. And that has been a problem with them, especially on this stretch. And it's one of the reasons I'll say that I don't think they played a complete 60, because it took Sarah Fillier coming out of the penalty box, stealing a puck and putting it in the back of the net for New York to wake up and play the game that they're capable of playing. And I think that is one of the big concerns with New York, is they're streaky. They're hot and cold, like in the game itself. They have these moments and they have these stretches in these periods where they look really good and they look really competitive. But they also have these stretches where if you can catch them, and if you could score a goal 40 seconds into the third period, you can kill them for 10 minutes. And if Fillier doesn't score there, who knows? Because I'll say, honestly, when we get to about the 10-minute mark and Fillier takes what was the third New York penalty in that frame, I'm starting to formulate questions in my head about, all right, get into the post-game presser, asking again about another loss that's going to be the 10th loss in 11 games, and trying to formulate, how am I going to break down what's going to be another sad loss for the Sirens? Now, obviously, I didn't have to do that. I had to make alterations to those questions because Sarah Fillier saves the day. But you can't rely on a natural hat trick saving your bacon every single day. And so that is one of the concerns with the Sirens is, do they have the consistency? Do we have enough faith that they can be consistent and play consistent hockey over these next 6 games? Because that's what they're going to have to do if they want to catch Ottawa, Toronto in this playoff race. They got to get, it's a cliche, complete 60 minutes of hockey, but it's something the Sirens have really struggled to do, especially on this stretch. The other interesting quote from Maddie Wheeler, I was going to save this for later, but I think it's just easier to dive into it now, is she said this verbatim. We stayed calm and actually had belief in ourselves to come back. There's a couple different sides to that quote. It's good that on I'll say it again, 4-game losing streak and a skid of losing 9 games in 10 games, or losing 9 to 10 games, it's nice to hear that they're still able to have that confidence and to be able to come back and say, hey, we're gonna come back in that game. The flip side is, if you read the other side of that quote, there were a lot of games on this stretch where they didn't have confidence that they could come back. And again, I think you can kind of see that if you go back and look at some of those games. The one I'll point to is Montreal. As soon as Dubois scores that first goal to tie it in the third period, you can see that weigh on the team and kind of the sense of it's happening again. Everything's unraveling again. And we're going to lose another game. And then a few minutes later, Dubois scores again. And then Stacey scores right after. It's a 3-1 game. And that time there was no comeback. The Sirens sleepwalk through that game and go 13 minutes without a shot on goal until Fillier gets one in the final 15 seconds. So, yeah, it's a blunt and honest answer from Maddie Wheeler, and one that probably rings true if you're looking back at some of the games on this recent stretch. But again, it's a lot easier to talk about this stuff and diagnose this stuff with them having won this game and still being in the mix for the playoffs. And there was a lot of things that they did really well. I think they continue to look very strong at even strength. And again, what Fargo said about the lines, I think I agree. I like the current makings of these, especially the top 9 in the forward group. again, they're a little concerning defensively, I think, right now. If you go back and you watch some of those shifts, Nicole Valario had a tough shift, and obviously she's activated. We'll get into this, but Jincy Roese gets traded to Minnesota for Křížová. So Nicole Valario stepping up into a bigger role, and she's a rookie. Wednesday was her 5th game of the season. I thought she did a solid job. She made some nice plays in the corners and stuff like that, but she had one really bad sequence where she turned the puck over to create a 2-on-1 for Minnesota. And then, now granted, she's on the ice for a couple minutes here and I think got a little gas, but she gets completely beat to the net by Zumwinkle, I believe. And there are a few moments in that game where you just see New York not in the right spots positionally. I mean, the first goal for Heise is a textbook example of that. And also just being slow to react on some of these drives to the net and allowing a lot of high-danger rush chances. And this is a game where they have their backup goalie, Callie Shanahan, who's making just her 2nd career start. I mean, she made some huge saves to keep them in that game. You know, Fillier is the main star of that game, and you don't win that game without Sarah Fillier. But for my money, the number 2 star is Shanahan. And the 2 players you don't win that game with are Fillier and Shanahan. I mean, Shanahan comes up with a huge save in overtime. Britta Curl gets a breakaway. She had a lot of space on the blocker side, and I think Curl probably wants that one back because I think if she elevates it, it's probably an overtime winner, and we're talking about a heartbreaking 4-3 Sirens loss. Curl doesn't put the best shot on net, but it's still one that challenges Shanahan, and Shanahan had to extend the right pad and knock it away. She had some huge stops midway through the first period, especially late in the third period, on some power plays to keep New York alive as they're killing 3 straight penalties. The special teams is another big issue. Less so the penalty kill. I think penalty kill held up strong against Minnesota. They allowed the 1 goal to Zumwinkle. Outside of that, I mean, those 3 kills in the third period are huge. But the power play is another big issue. And it's odd because New York hasn't had the worst power play in the league this year. They're even after Wednesday, which was an 0-for-5 day. They're still 5th in the league. It's 13.8%. How many teams have been dominant on the power play all season long, right? I mean, it's tough to do that. But with New York, it really feels like it's hot and cold. And when they're cold, it's borderline uncompetitive. And that's what you saw on Wednesday. You get 5 power plays, including this lengthy 5-on-3 sequence where Minnesota takes 3 penalties basically in the span of 3.5 minutes. And so you've got a 5-on-3. Minnesota takes a penalty at 5-on-3. So you got about 30 seconds with Shanahan out of the net where you're pressuring Minnesota and you're outnumbering them 6-3. And in that 3 penalty sequence, New York managed 1 shot on goal. And on those 5 power plays, they managed 2 shots on goal. So if you compare Minnesota shorthanded with New York on the power play, shots were even 2-2. That's with a 5-on-3 and a 6-on-3. That's not good. Right? I mean, that's simple. I'm dumbing stuff down here. Obviously, that's not good. What you're seeing is, and Fargo mentioned this a little bit, is a team that I think just gets a little too, I don't want to say lazy, but they get a little too comfortable on the perimeter, and they fire in a lot of shots from the perimeter, and there's not a lot of action in between the circles. And you saw it in that 5-on-3 as Minnesota packs the middle here. They come in close, they play it in tight, and they don't really allow anything on net. And New York never really threatens on any of those 5 power plays. It's something they have to figure out because when we've seen them at their best, they can be very dangerous. They've got the talent to do so, even with Kaltounkova out. If you've got a top-line power play of Sarah Fillier and Casey O'Brien and Ann Churkowski, and Nyland Pearson's a really good power play quarterback, and Kristen O'Neill is a really sturdy bumper for someone that you want there in that low slot area, and great at winning faceoffs. Like, that's a group that even with Kaltounkova out can have a lot of success on the advantage. And they have at times in the past, But we've also seen them have these lengthy skids in the power play. And that's, I should say, I think it's one of the main concerns. It's something that Greg Fargo said, that's the main takeaway. That's the main area of growth that we really have to key in on. I think he's right, because New York has a ways to go before we really start talking about playoff aspirations and playoff dreams. They got to erase a 5-point deficit in the standings. But if they get to the playoffs, that's something that could be their undoing, is special teams. Got to be able to score on the power play. Those are free opportunities. Those are gifted opportunities to create some danger on net, even if it doesn't result in a goal. The fatigue of peppering an opponent for 2 minutes at a 5-on-4 or a 5-on-3 and making their goalie work, that can build up as the game goes along. The other side of that is, if you're a team and you kill a 5-on-3 penalty, all of a sudden, think of how much of a confidence boost that is. Think of how much energy that injects when you do get back to even strength. And that's kind of how you're feeding Minnesota. I don't think it's a confidence that as soon as the last of those 3 penalties ended, Minnesota goes right down the ice and scores. Because that's what killing a penalty can do. So that's most of the game stuff. One quirky thing aside, and this got some traction online. We talked to Greg Fargo a little bit afterwards. I covered hockey in college, covered Ranger games, been a lifelong Ranger fan. I've watched a ton of hockey in my 23 years of life. And I've never seen a player deemed ineligible because they weren't on the online roster. I'm a baseball fan. I've seen, managers mess up a lineup card and it's a free out. I've seen that happen at the high school level too, obviously. I haven't ever seen a player enter the game, be on the ice for a game, but not be listed on the lineup card, and halfway through the game get told, hey, you can't play anymore. And that's what happened to Minnesota's Elizabeth Jaguar, who's a former New York Siren, actually played 2 seasons here. And what happened is, whatever lineup that Minnesota submitted, and I talked to Ken Klee about it afterwards, and he said, just an honest mistake, but whatever lineup card that they submitted to the league and the officials didn't have Elizabeth Jaguar on it. And so Fargo recalled, he's, we're at the board, we've got their lines charted out, and at some point during the first period, he said some of the players noticed, hey, Jaguar's on the ice, but she's not on our lineup board. And so they talked about it the first period, and it's interesting that they didn't challenge it right away. And Minnesota actually scores a power play goal at the start of the second period, and then maybe at the first stoppage, the first ice stoppage, Fargo calls one of the officials over. They challenge it. Jaguar gets ruled out for the rest of the game. Just a wild, quirky thing. I've never seen that happen before. Just kind of funny, and that's what makes sports so beautiful, right? We talked about, I mentioned Shanahan a little bit, just to dive into that a little bit more. I wonder if we'll see her get another start down the stretch here, right? New York's got 6 games left. Clearly, Kaylee Osborne is their number one. But, if you look at the games recently, and now I'll be the first to say I don't think New York's defense has been great on this stretch. I think that's been a big reason of why they've lost some of these games, is they've been out of position. They've had some poor zone gap defense. But Osborne hasn't looked sharp, really, since the Olympic break. Certainly doesn't look as sharp as she played in the first half, when, she was one of the most valuable players for New York in the first half, with how often she was playing. To see Shanahan come in and have a game like that, to allow the first shot of the game as a goal, and then kind of bunker down and have a good first period, bunker down in the third period and make some key saves, make that stop on Bretta Curl-Salemi in overtime. Callie Shanahan really kept them in that game. The Sirens posted on social media, they give out that red beret for the player of the game, and they gave it to Shanahan. And actually, I saw some people on social media complaining about it. Listen, the red beret, it's a teammate kind of thing. It's one of those things. It doesn't always go to the most valuable player in the game. A lot of times, players will try and give it to someone that they feel like is putting in good work and deserves recognition. So, listen, don't make a huge stink about it. But, I mean, listen, she deserves praise and flowers for what she did in that game, because the Sirens don't win that game without her. I'm a little curious to see if Fargo turns back to her at all. Obviously, these last 6 games are going to be really important for New York. But I think it's fair to wonder, is the workload too much for Kaylee Osborne? And, 23-year-old goalie in her first full year as a starter that's seeing an unprecedented workload in the PWHL, basically. Now we've seen, obviously, Erin Frankel and Amrene Debians and Gwyneth Phillips are getting a lot of run this season. But, I mean, those 3 are on a different kind of tier than Kaylee Osborne is right now. I don't think that's wrong to say. I wouldn't put Kaylee Osborne in the utmost echelon of PWHL goalies yet. I think she's clearly a starting caliber goalie, but I think she's on the mid to low end of that spectrum. She's not someone that's going to consistently steal you games throughout the course of a season the way that Frankel and Debians and Phillips can. I think she can certainly steal you games in spots. We've seen her steal games for the Sirens in spots. But she's a second-year goalie, and she's getting a huge workload. And I think you're going to see some inconsistency there. I think that comes with the territory. So does Shanahan get one more game down the stretch? I wouldn't rule it out. And again, I do think some of Osborne's struggles lately can be tied to, I think the Sirens have started to slip defensively a little bit here. But, I mean, it's worth pondering. It's a lot to put on the shoulders of a 23-year-old in Kaylee Osborne. I know I'm jumping around a little bit here. I want to go back to Maddie Wheeler, who scored the first goal of this game, because we're going to get into some more big picture stuff in the second half. I meant to hit on some Maddie Wheeler stuff when we were talking about her quotes, about the resilience and stuff like that. I kind of ended up getting distracted and got away from it. But Maddie Wheeler's had a really good season for the Sirens. And I tweeted this. I think she's kind of flown under the radar because when you talk rookies and you talk Sirens, you talk Kaltounkova and O'Brien. And, I mean, deservedly so. Kaltounkova for a while was leading the league in scoring. O'Brien right now quietly had a 2-point game on Wednesday. It's 18 points. That's 1 behind Fillier for the team lead. She's in the top 10 of league scoring. I think she's tied for 7th. She leads all rookies. Like, Casey O'Brien's having a phenomenal year, and so was Kaltounkova at this point. Maddie Wheeler has been not just a perfect fit for the Sirens, but she's been a high-end offensive producer. 3 goals, 11 points now after what was a huge goal at that time of the game, when you consider, again, Heisey silencing the crowd 16 seconds in. Does New York have a response? They do, and it's one of their rookie forwards. And if you watch that play, now, this was not a great defensive play by Minnesota. Wheeler loses an edge by the blue line, and they kind of lose her in the whole offensive picture. And so she just cuts right down the middle, and no one stops her. And Claire DeGeorge, swinging behind the net, finds her, kind of throws it off her skate, but Wheeler's able to kick it onto her stick and fire it top shelf. This is, she's tied for 4th on the team in points, tied for 5th in rookie scoring. The Sirens drafted 9 players. She was drafted 6th. They drafted Dale Ross ahead of her. You go back, they drafted McKenna Webster ahead of her. And obviously, Webster is a highly touted prospect who isn't with the team this year, as she's pursuing field hockey. But, they drafted some notable names ahead of her. They drafted Ann Trukowski 9th overall. Maddie Wheeler gets drafted 27th overall. Late in the 4th round. I think she's maybe the steal of the PWHL draft so far. When you look at what she's done, she's been basically a top 6 talent. Really good edge, really strong forechecker. Again, for this new Sirens identity that they're trying to build of being young and being fast and being relentless and being a thorn in the opponent's side. I mean, is there anyone that fits the bill better than Maddie Wheeler? So again, I don't think she's gotten, certainly not nationally, hasn't gotten her flowers the way that Kaltounkova or O'Brien has. And I'm not sure maybe even in Siren circles if she gets talked enough for how important she's been to this team's success. I don't want to put a damper on this, but that she's a player I would worry about being able to retain. Because I have to imagine there's going to be a lot of interest in her this offseason. And if you're doing the math about expansion and protection, again, I don't want to put a damper on this point because the point is Maddie Wheeler has been awesome for the Sirens. And that's someone that I think would thrive in a postseason environment. She's got that gritty 200-foot game that when the ice shrinks, I think she's still going to be effective. She's a really hard-nosed player. I think there's going to be a lot of interest from expansion teams. And I'd worry about being able to keep her. But we're still in the 2025-26 seasons. We don't have to worry about that just yet. A few other points to hit. Let's talk Denisa Křížová. So the Sirens make a trade about an hour before the deadline. Defender for a forward swap. They send Jincy Roese to Minnesota. They get Křížová back. I did a YouTube short about this, but I think there's a lot to talk about, and this is easier to do in long form anyway. This trade made a lot of sense. I did see some people, and now granted, what did I just say? I said the Sirens have not been great defensively. And I saw some people, A, complaining that they didn't go out and get another goalie, and B, complaining we're going to trade someone from our defensive core when our defense is playing about as bad as they've played all season. Both valid points. To the goalie front, I don't know that there was a goalie available to be acquired. And again, you have to be able to, you can't trade draft picks yet. So you have to be able to match need for need. And that's the key with Minnesota. Minnesota needed a defender badly. They need someone. They put Roese on the second pair, but clearly they needed help on that bottom pair over whether you're talking Madison Bazal or Brooke Becker. They needed help on that defensive core, especially. I think they're good enough to win a third straight Walter Cup championship. I think they think that as well. But they lost a lot. They lost Claire Thompson and Sophie Jakes from their defensive core. And I think they're feeling those losses right now. Thompson more so than anything in Minnesota could really use some reliable two-way defenders. Is Jincy Roese the most defensive-minded defender? No, but she's an upgrade over what they have, and she's an experienced Olympic-level performer, knows a lot of the Frost players from playing on the Olympics with the USA and other international stages in the past. So that you have to keep that in mind. That it's easy to say, hey, go out and get a goalie, but you have to find a team that's going to want a defender, because if you're looking at New York, they had needs at forward and goalie. I don't disagree. Could they have gone out and could they use a goalie? Well, we saw Shanahan have a great game Wednesday, but coming in, we had a small sample size of Shanahan that wasn't exactly inspiring, and you got a large sample size of Kaylee Osborne, who is kind of slumping down the stretch here. I don't know that you were going to find a goalie that was going to fix any of your issues for what that picture looks like right now. You certainly weren't going to find a goalie that's better than Kaylee Osborne, and then at that point, are you going to give up an asset with value to get a backup goalie when you have dire needs at forward? But we say all that to say, right? They had needs at forward and goalie. They had a surplus at defense. And when you look at their defensive ranks, and I said this on the YouTube short, but Jincy Roese was the odd player out. And that's not a knock on her. I just think the way that they were utilizing her, she had, probably more value to other teams than she had to New York in the role that they were playing her. She is an offensive-minded defender who's a really good puck mover, can help your defense break out of its own zone. You can plug her on the power play, and she can be a really, really good power play quarterback. And New York wasn't using her on the power play. Nyland Pearson's been on power play 1 all season long. They've gone with a 2-defender look at power play 2. And, Roese got some looks there early on, but for the most part this season, it's been Allison Simpson and Jamie Bourbonnais, and she really hasn't been able to crack either of those spots consistently. So if you're not using Jincy Roese on the power play, and she's playing bottom pair minutes for you, basically 15 minutes a night, and you have a rookie in Dale Ross, who's been your seventh defender all year long, and you have Nicole Valera, who's on your reserve roster, but clearly they trust enough that when they play her, she plays, about 10, 11 minutes a game. And even you have Olivia Knowles, who I think is probably the lowest on that depth chart, but still, it's a body. It's another player at that position that you can turn to if you need it. That Roese is someone that has, again, value to other teams, that you could get something back for her, but your blue line is still intact. And I think the New York blue line is still intact. Now, she's probably better than Dale Ross and Valerio and Olivia Knowles, but when you look at New York's forward group, clearly they needed help, and I think it was worth trading someone like Jincy Roese to bring in someone like Denisa Křížovà. Now, the offensive numbers have not been great for Křížovà, and we're not talking about even at her best, this is not a pure goal scorer. Her best year is 4 goals and 9 points in 30 games. This year, a little tougher, 1 goal and 5 points. But she's a good fit for that system. Kyle Cushman has a really good video breaking this down. I can't recommend it enough. And he compared her to Maddie Wheeler. And watching Křížovà, she only played a little over 10 minutes on Wednesday. Just kind of getting settled in, playing alongside Kristen O'Neill and Peyton Levis. I see the parallels. She's someone that very willing to go to the dirty areas of the ice. And you saw her in that game aggressively go into the corners and lay the body on people, and go to the net and fight for positioning, and try and set a screen on the goalie. All those little things. Good speed, that was active in both zones. And I think fans are going to like Křížovà. Now, is she going to provide a major offensive boost? It remains to be seen. You put her on the right line, and maybe she does. Again, if you line her up with someone who plays a similar style game, if you want to pair her with Maddie Wheeler, I actually don't mind the current lineup right now alongside O'Neill and Levis. I think that's a pretty stingy when you talk about defensive ability. That's a team that's a line that's gonna give opponents fits, and they're not gonna go up. They might not have the most offensive firepower, but that's a line that's gonna be a pain in the ass. So I wouldn't mind seeing Křížovà stick around with that line. Maybe she could get some goals in dirty areas the way that Maddie Wheeler has this season. But more than anything else, it's a system fit, and it's someone that you can confidently plug into, whether it's the top 6, whether it's the middle 6, that has more of an offensive upside than some of the other names that you're turning to. Like an El Harchi, for example. And Harchi's still in the top 9 because of injuries to Kaltounkova and Gerard. El Harchi's someone that can play in the top 9 but doesn't have a ton of offensive upside. Křížovà's got a little bit more. And, talk to Greg Fargo about that. He wants to put her in positions and situations to succeed offensively. We'll see if it translates. But if nothing else, you've got a player that should mesh with the heavy forecheck that New York, I think, is trying to implement. She's someone that, obviously, she got poached by Seattle last offseason in expansion. So, remains to be seen if she survives expansion this season. But she's on an expiring deal, and I wonder if New York will look to bring her back, because if you keep the same personnel in place, Greg Fargo as head coach, and you're able to retain a chunk of these rookie pieces, Křížovà is someone that should mesh pretty well with what the Sirens are trying to do here. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if the Sirens try and keep her. So that's something I would keep in mind with this move. Is I don't know that Jincy Roese is necessarily in their plans moving forward. It didn't seem like a perfect fit for New York. I don't think that she played poorly. She actually had really strong offensively, Jincy, in the first half of the season, and at one point was the team's leading scorer at defense. So I thought she had a pretty decent season with New York, had a plus rating. For her role, I thought did a pretty good job. But I'm not sure that New York was necessarily going to bring her back, and especially when you consider kind of the blockage at power play. I think probably a better fit on Minnesota. And I think Minnesota's going to get more out of her. They're going to put her in a larger role. They're going to put her into stronger offensive opportunities. I think you're going to see Minnesota maximize her talents a little bit more. I think maybe that's true of Křížová. That, Křížová was going to be in a bottom 6 role with Kendall Coy and Schofield coming back. Okay, maybe it's, obviously New York has some lanes here to play top 6 minutes and a system that should mesh with her game. And she seems, she's said all the right things so far. She's been a fan favorite with the media. She's had a couple good quotes that got some chuckles. And one of the ones that I think should make Sirens fans happy is, she said, I always hated playing against New York. They were always so hardworking, so tough to play against that I'm happy I don't have to play against them anymore. And she said similar things about Sarah Fillier. I'm glad I don't have to play Sarah Fillier anymore. So I think she should become she has the potential to become a fan favorite with Sirens fans, which would be nice. Let's pivot to why did they get Křížová? That's because Kaltounkova is on LTIR. Interesting how this all went down. So we'll get the basics out of the way. So when you get placed on long-term injury reserve, you have to miss 21 days. Now, that can be backdated to your last appearance. So the Sirens are backdating this to March 24th, which means she could come back as early as April 14th. Sirens have a game on the 15th at home against Toronto. That'll be a big game if you consider, take a look at the playoff standings, right? They're fighting for positioning with Toronto. So that's going to be a big game. So not necessarily, we could see Kaltounkova again this season. It's been interesting how they kind of handled this and went about revealing this, because it starts out as a day-to-day designation. We don't get any info on whether it's upper body and lower body. And I know it's hockey, so we don't get a ton of injury information to begin with, but usually we get upper body, lower body, and we didn't with Kaltounkova. And the other part that is interesting here is, her last game was March 18th. So could you have backdated it to the 19th? Well, one of the things we have to try and figure out is, was she active at practice in any of the days leading up to that Seattle game? Was the first game that she missed. So they backdated it to the 24th. I'll pull up my calendar to see which day that was. So that's the Tuesday before they went and played Seattle in Chicago. It's I don't have any. It's been tough to figure out, was she dressed at practice or not. I don't have any information on it at the time. Trying to dig a little bit deeper and find out some of that stuff. But regardless, I think I'm a little concerned about whether or not she's able to make a return this season. And that's not because I don't have any inside information. Just kind of guessing here. I'm on high alert with how careful they've been with this information. How careful they should be in general with a number 1 overall pick and potentially a future, if she's not already the face of the franchise, a potential future face of the franchise. I mean, it's tough. We have no idea what's going on with her. But what we do know is that that's going to be a really tough hole to replace. I don't really have to tell you how important Kaltounkova is to this offense. She's someone that is, obviously she's got a laser of a shot. She's a one-woman wrecking crew, is what she is. And while her offensive talents, I think, draw a lot of attention, she's had a really good 200-foot game this year, and she's played it with we always talk about that physical edge, and sometimes she gets into penalties and stuff like that. But, I mean, they played her at center down the stretch here post-Olympics. And she's playing defensively responsible hockey. And she gave New York this great lineup with 3 really strong centers down the middle in O'Brien, O'Neill, and Kaltounkova. And for at least 2 weeks, you're going to be a little shallow down the middle. I mean, Claire DeGeorge, who they signed from Toronto, and Toronto waived her, and she signed about a couple weeks ago, March 18th was the day right after the Taylor Girard injury. right, Claire DeGeorge is a big forward, probably best profiles as a fourth liner, but, good defensive side to her, can play center, even though some of the face-off stats over her career haven't been great. I mean, she's not your prototypical third-line center if you're trying to make a Walter Cup champion push. Obviously, you'd feel a lot better with Kaltounkova down the middle. I mean, Claire DeGeorge really doesn't have much of an offensive upside. She had the assist on the Wheeler goal, and that was her first point of the season. So, I mean, right, you don't sign Claire DeGeorge to go out there and score goals and create offense. You sign her because she's a 5'11" forward that I think is probably an upgrade over most of the bottom sixers that they have in that current rotation right now. And a good hard edge to her game that should be a good fit for this lineup. But it's certainly gonna be tough without Kaltounkova. You're gonna really have to rely on Fillier and O'Brien to shoulder the load of this offense and see what other contributions you can get. Whether that's Maddie Wheeler chipping through, if that's Křížová stepping up and having some big games. And it's been a quiet stretch from a goal scoring perspective for Ann Czerkowski. So can Czerkowski step up and have a couple games down the stretch here on a line that's been playing really well? I mean, we'll say, right, you can't necessarily bank on getting 3 goals from Sarah Fillier every game. That's awesome if that happens. But clearly, New York's scoring depth has taken a little bit of a hit here. And again, it certainly puts more weight on that top line, I think, more than anything else. But yeah, so that's the Kaltounkova stuff in a nutshell. Again, hope is that she can come back, because if she does come back, I mean, she's only guaranteed to miss 3 games. So if she does come back by that April 15th game, I mean, you'll still have her for that final push coming into the playoffs. But I think at this point, that's a big if. 2 last things here. I'm going to hit playoffs, and then we're going to finish with MSG. I think that's a good way to attack this. Looking at this playoff picture, I mean, this is the fun part of the season. If you're a sports fan or a hockey fan, this is when you can really turn into other teams' games with a very clear agenda and a lot on the line, right? Like, you could be scoreboard watching now, especially now that the Sirens added 2 points with an overtime win. Like, now is the time, like, had the Sirens lost that game, I kind of might have told you, like, hey, don't worry about the scoreboard. The Sirens got to focus on their games and just getting any points that they can. And that's still, obviously, that's still the main concern. We're not having a conversation about the playoff race if New York doesn't win significantly more than they lose in these last 6 games. They're trailing Toronto by 5 points. Ottawa, so it's New York's at 29, Ottawa's at 33, Toronto's at 34. And Toronto's the 4th place team, that final playoff spot. And then you got to go a bit, the next 3 playoff teams, Boston and Montreal already clinched. Minnesota is going to clinch. It would take a seismic collapse. I mean, even after they've lost 3 straight games, they've still got 9 points up on Toronto. So they're sitting comfortably in that number 3 seed. So you've got a race. It's really 3 teams going for that last, that number 4 seed. Right, Vancouver was in the mix for a little bit there. There was a second where they tied New York at 27 points. I don't expect Vancouver to hang around here. They've got the hardest remaining schedule in the PWHL. They're in a stretch right now where they play. What was this stretch? They play the top 3 teams in the league. So here's the stretch: Montreal, Minnesota, Boston. They already lost to Montreal. That's how Montreal clinched a playoff berth. Then Vancouver gets 2 straight against Seattle, and then you finish the season with Montreal and Minnesota. So that's asking a lot out of the Golden Knights to be able to win in bunches to really enter that playoff conversation. So I don't think that that's going to happen. But the 3 teams really in the race are Toronto, Ottawa, and New York. And for New York's purposes, and I tweeted this a few days ago over the weekend, the big concern is Ottawa, because if you're the Sirens, the thing you're looking for is how much can we control. Now the Sirens put themselves in a hole here where some of this stuff is out of their hands. If Toronto and Ottawa win out, you're kind of out of luck. The difference is obviously New York plays both of those teams, so that's where the element of control comes in. But New York plays Toronto twice, and that's really where they can, I think, swing this gap. I mean, listen, you win 2 regulation games. You're trailing Toronto by 5. You beat them twice in regulation, all of a sudden, bam, you're ahead of them. You don't have as much control there with Ottawa, right? You only play them once. And I do think Ottawa is maybe poised as the bigger threat anyway. Now, Reagan Kirk is back for Toronto in net, and that certainly helps them, as opposed to running out a backup goalie with that's a Lane Chuli or Jesse McPherson. Ottawa with Gwyneth Phillips, who was on an absolute tear the last 2 games prior to losing against Toronto. A red-hot Gwyneth Phillips is going to be really tough to beat, and we've seen that Ottawa offense be really dangerous. Again, I think those 2 games against Toronto, you're okay with letting Toronto win games, especially if it's against Ottawa. Toronto and Ottawa play 2 more times this season. The dream scenario there is probably Toronto taking 2 of 3. But even if Toronto sweeps, you still control your destiny to a sense where, listen, you beat Toronto twice, you're going to put yourself in a decent position to be able to catch them. Again, with Ottawa, you don't necessarily have as much of an opportunity there. The bottom line is you need points. That's really, if you want to have as much control over your playoff hopes and your playoff future as possible, you got to stack points here. Realistically, you got to win almost twice as much as you lose down the stretch here. But the Sarah Fillier hat trick that dragged them into the fight. If they lose that game, I really don't think playoffs are in the picture. But they won that. They won Wednesday, and so you're back in this. So they've got a chance, 100%. 6 games left, trailing by 5 points. A regulation wins 3 points. A 5-point deficit can certainly be erased. Got to win games. New York needs to stack and build some momentum here. This can't turn into what the win against Ottawa on March 8th kind of became, which was just a blip on the radar. New York's really struggled on the road this season. So, they're going to finish the season off on the road. So they're going to be tested. They're going to be tested, and we're going to see what they're made of, because who knows, they might have to go through this whole playoff surge. There's a chance they go through it without Kaltounkova. And so we'll really see how deep they can dig. But the last thing is, as we're talking about building momentum, is, that's a pretty good way to go into the MSG game, man. That's it. Obviously, this MSG game is going to be a big event. It's the sold-out MSG crowd. It's a tough ticket to get, even for media circles, I've been told. It's a long line to try and get into press row for that game. And there is a world where the Sirens go into that game with 5 straight losses, losing 10 of 11. But that world isn't the one that we live in. And Fillier's hat trick, talking a lot about building momentum post-game with Greg Fargo and Maddie Wheeler. What they're looking to do is take that momentum, play in front of a sold-out Sirens crowd that's going to be largely in their favor, and try and beat a banged-up Seattle team that, yes, Hilary Knight is back. And that I think that's cool, right? It's the PWHL's first game in Madison Square Garden, and Hilary Knight's playing. That's what you want. Even if it would be easier to beat Seattle if Hilary Knight isn't playing, sure. But the Sirens also lost to the Torrent with Hilary Knight out. So, listen, you want, for the drama and what this is going to mean as a landmark event in the PWHL, you want Hilary Knight playing in this game. I think that's kind of a beautiful moment in terms of what she means to the world of professional women's hockey, that she gets to participate in what's going to be one of the biggest games in PWHL history to this point. There's a few interesting storylines as well in terms of Alex Carpenter and Corinne Schroeder coming back here, and I think from what we've seen in the past with some of these reunions, whether that's Abby Rock and Jade Downey Landry, The Abby Rock one in particular, I remember talking to Rock post-game and her mentioning all the fans that migrated over to her, to the visitors net for warm-ups. I think Carpenter and Schroeder are going to get big hands, and I think they're going to be fan favorites with this crowd. I think it's probably cool for them. This is the first time that they're going to play in New York since they were let go in the offseason. And to get that chance to do it at MSG, I think that's really special. Even Bourbonnais talked about that a little bit. And I'll have some stuff. I talked to Fillier and Bourbonnais a little bit about Carpenter and Schroeder coming back and doing it on the MSG stage. But Bourbonnais talked a little bit about that's really special for them to come back and be able to be a part of this MSG game. That's it's nice that everything worked out that way. So that's going to be, I think, a fun and interesting part of that game. You've also got, just in general, attendance momentum coming from a Wednesday game that was, I believe, 4,265 people at Prudential Center. That's a new weeknight record. The Sirens have set a weeknight record in each of the last 3 games. But they're gonna shatter their home attendance record on Saturday. And at the end of the day, what's most important? It's the win. And Sarah Fillier had this great quote about, more than anything else, we want to get points here. We want to get points in this game. And what better stakes than at MSG? And so they really seem to be embracing the challenge and the moment of on the big stage. Not only is this a big game for the PWHL, it's a huge game for the Sirens. Because if you beat Minnesota but then go right back and lose to Seattle, that's a gut punch. And that would be another tough blow for your playoff chances. You got to beat the teams below you in the standings. And right now for New York, there's not many. It's Vancouver and Seattle. So that's a game you have to win. I try to be careful about must-win games. It certainly feels like that could be a must-win game. But it's going to, listen, MSG is going to be fun. I anticipate that we'll probably do another one of these episodes after that MSG game, because whether they win or lose, there's going to be a lot of content to break down from that. There's going to be a lot of takeaways either way. Some stuff to plug for my own website. We'll have a Siren Sounds notebook column coming out Friday, kind of setting up some of the MSG stuff and diving more into Křížová and that trade and New York's plans for her. Greg Fargo has spoken very highly about Křížová and what she can bring, and I kind of saved some of that stuff. I didn't necessarily go full into details on this episode, so listen, I can't give away all the trade secrets. I get you to read some of my columns occasionally. You'd be so kind. But, so some MSG stuff, some Křížová stuff, that'll be coming out. Some stuff earlier this week if you're looking for, reactions to the Jincy Roese Křížová trade, some takeaways after the Kaltounkova injury and what's next. We didn't really get into this a ton in this episode, but, Nicole Villario's in line for a bigger role and kind of leapfrogged Dale Ross in the depth chart, and bigger fish to fry today, especially with the coming off the Fillier game and stuff like that. But that's interesting, right? Because Dale Ross is a 4th-round draft pick. Nicole Villario has been on the reserve roster for most of the season, but clearly they really like her. So I get into more of that stuff in a couple of my articles I've already posted this week. And I'll link these below in the YouTube description. But yeah, that's basically it. Again, that's one heck of a win Wednesday. One heck of a game from Sarah Fillier. You don't see many gems like that. So if you were in person for that, I forgot to mention this at the top of the episode. She's the first PWHL player to finish off a hat trick in overtime. 3rd natural hat trick. It's a historic game. Pretty historic stuff. Stay tuned for a bunch of MSG coverage. I'll be at Mustang Harry's recording a Rink Rap podcast, which is mainly a New York Rangers podcast, but we'll be doing some Siren stuff with my boss and my editor, Jim Cerny. There's rumors that a very special Sirens guest may be stopping by. I can't tip my hand just yet because they may not show. So I don't know yet. It's not confirmed. But it's very possible. So it won't be a live podcast. But if you swing by Mustang Harry's, I'll be there from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And then I'll be covering the game at MSG. So listen, exciting weekend coming up. But yeah, that does it for this edition of Siren Sounds. We ran a little long, went over an hour, which is a little bit of a bummer. I didn't mean to do that, but hey, lot to get into. So, listen, appreciate you guys tuning in, sticking around, and yeah, stay tuned for more content. Take it easy, everybody.